Don't worry. We'll finish this and go see her together.
Welcome back to Retro Rebound. Final Fantasy fans, we've really struggled to find some common ground here on this channel. When I came out and said Final Fantasy IX is my personal favorite Final Fantasy, people were mighty upset. When I came out and said, hey, after playing Final Fantasy X for the first time, I like it, I respect what it's done for the JRPG genre. However, it's not really my favorite. I find it quite flawed. People were mighty angry about that one. And I imagine today won't be that day we find common ground, because in today's video, we're putting respect on Final Fantasy XIII. And this is the beginning of a somewhat trilogy recap on why I think Final Fantasy XIII gets way too much slander, and I'm gonna try to put some respect on its name. The goal of it is just that though, respect. I don't need you to walk away loving this game, saying you're gonna try it out. My goal is, with a game that's been destroyed as much as Final Fantasy XIII, is that you can walk away and go, okay, not my cup of tea. I get how someone likes it though. Because this game, outside of, I'd say, Final Fantasy VIII, has been dragged through the mud. So welcome all to a different style video here on Retro Rebound, where, as always, we're reflecting, but we're also coming to the defense of a game many years after its release. So let's talk about Final Fantasy XIII, as always, the complete in-box experience, starting off with the back. Cocoon, a human paradise, floats above the world of Pulse. When an ancient entity of Pulse origin awakens on the outskirts of a Cocoon city, paradise is threatened from within. Chosen by destiny, 6 must choose between saving mankind and saving themselves. The battle within begins, with some beautiful artwork here. I love this shot. And then some in-game screenshots. No real descriptions of what you're going to be doing in the game. Like, what are the standout mechanics here? Always found that interesting. Nothing beefing up the graphics either, which again is kind of surprising because this is a beautiful video game, as we'll talk about in a little bit. Cracking it open, here we go. The trading card experience, as I like to call it. 1, 2, 3 discs. Check that one out there. It's something with JRPGs and multiple discs. I love Lost Odyssey, and that was 4 discs. So more discs, more fun. Anyway, outside of your 3 discs, you get this Square Enix members card for product registration, and then you get this thick boy manual. Cracking it open, you'll see some portraits of all the characters that'll be in your party, little character bios of them, and just like other Final Fantasy manuals, every little mechanic is explained. Exploration, the indicators for them, how you auto-talk, how Seath Stones and missions work, interactive objects, chocobo riding, enemy encounters, upgrading equipment, how battles work, going into commands, of course the paradigm shift mechanic, which confused a lot of people, Gestalt mode, Eidolon, so on and so forth. So there's a lot to this game that, again, I think goes very unappreciated, and the manual dives into all of those. If you are picking this game up, my personal suggestion to you would be to do the 360 version. This is backwards compatible. It's got the Xbox One X enhancements. It has been FPS boosted as well, so there's the benefit of that. Not that the PS3 version is bad. I actually played it on the PS3 for the first time back in 2009 when this game came out. Remember that date, by the way, when you're looking at some of the gameplay in this video, some of the cinematics in this video. It's absolutely insane. It's like the best looking old game you can play to date. But yeah, definitely get it for the 360 if you're going to play it, because of the back compat support, because of the enhancements there. And for those of you who are trying to use it on PC, good luck. I wouldn't do it. So in this video, I'm not going to do what I've seen in other defense pieces of Final Fantasy XIII, which is pretend those mistakes and errors that exist within the game just are misconceptions. There is a lot of reasonable criticism to be lopped, especially on this one. Out of the entire trilogy, Final Fantasy XIII, the first game, is 100% the most flawed. I think 13-2 is one of the best Final Fantasy games made, but 13-1, yeah, very flawed. And Lightning Returns is just a breed of its own. It's completely different from really any other Final Fantasy game. We'll talk about that eventually. So again, all this criticism I think is valid for the game. But what I've noticed with Final Fantasy XIII is it gets destroyed, man. People hate this game. They hate the trilogy. And it's a game that I call death by terminology. It's so important when your naming convention in RPGs makes sense. Because Final Fantasy XIII, I think, lives and dies on how much you understand their code names for everything. The fal'Cie, the Lucy, the Focus, the Sanctum, Cocoon, Purge, so on and so forth. Like, there are so many terms for every little thing that exists that as it's working within its own lore, it's not really trying to use that to its strengths and instead making new terms for every little thing that exists in its world. And it can easily confuse the player. Right out the gate, once you're on the train, you get off of it, combat begins, and you don't know anyone's motivations. It feels like you're picking up a story halfway through. And for a lot of people, they're like, that's not my speed, because they start, again, throwing around these terms like the Fal'Cie, which are these powerful demigods, or the Lucy, which are human thralls that have to serve the Fal'Cie. But the way they do it is they expect the player to know, but never really, truly explain all of that. And I get it. It can be mighty frustrating. But this is also a game about patience. And I don't think a lot of people had patience with Final Fantasy XIII. I'm sorry, I got to call some of y'all out, because this is a game that does explain these things as you get deeper into it. There are many things that people complain about. I see in the comments, on forums, on Reddit. They're like, oh, this Fal'Cie nonsense. Da, da, da. I'm just like, it literally starts to make sense by the halfway point. And the expectation of a creator of a game is this is the story from start to finish. You're not supposed to, in my eyes, understand everything by the halfway point. The mystery is what keeps you going forward. And in this case, for a lot of people, the confusion. I was there, man. Yeah, really, really confusing lore. But it's not like Kingdom Hearts confusing, where I feel like it's convoluted. It's just the way it's delivered to the player, and it's sometimes failure to expound upon it, and oftentimes its obtuse delivery really hurts it. So 100% the criticism is valid. I just think it's overblown on people not giving themselves enough credit. You can understand it. There are great recap videos if you need a refresher or if you just want to have it explained to you. But I feel like by the end of the game, you understand what's going on lore-wise. So I wanted to address that because a lot of people's complaints really don't have to do a lot with the gameplay systems, maybe the gameplay experience. You'll know what I mean a little bit. We'll talk about that. But its story is definitely the most heavily critiqued part of the trilogy. And I think, again, it's just sometimes flat out unfair. Now, one thing we can agree on, the characters. You know, mixed motivations, for sure. Like, Snow has the most consistent, I feel, motivation, right? He's a little corny, a bit corny, but at least Snow is consistent in what he wants. Lightning is one of the most emotional protagonists you'll see. This ex-soldier punching out Snow one minute, agreeing with him the next minute, then punching him out again, yelling at him, saying it's hopeless to save her sister Sarah, then really believing in the mission. What a roller coaster of a protagonist. And I wouldn't say for the best. It makes her really entertaining, and I do like her as a protagonist, but I think they were just using her as this moldable, emotional figure that for every situation, they just plug her in and have her respond. And there never felt like there was consistency there. It's interesting because one thing that does destroy this game is its voice acting. For a lot of people, they don't really like it, specifically Vanille.
Hey, Lightning! Over here!
And I find that hilarious because I think Vanille is one of the best characters in the friggin' game. She has one of the best backstories, and I don't want to spoil it like we have in previous retrospectives here on Retro Rebound, because for me personally, this is a game that if you end up walking away from this video and you say like, wait, that actually sounded cool, I want you to experience that. My goal is not to spoil it for you. But Vanille is one of those characters that starts off, you hear her, you're like, oh, good God, what happened? And then you learn more about her and you're like, okay, well, I can deal with the voice, because by the end of the game, you're like, whoa. At least I was. I thought it was very surprising. It subverted my expectations. So ultimately, on a lore front, on a story front, I think the game is not perfect. It does get a lot of criticism, sometimes unfairly, I would say, sometimes fairly. I just think people need to have a more open mind and give it a shot. One thing we also got to talk about, of course, is the gameplay experience. This is another point of criticism. Too linear, far too linear. I don't know about y'all, but when I got to Grand Pulse, that was a pretty open game to me. There are a lot of pathways. It is a very linear game, but this is where, you know, it's subjective, right? Because for me, Final Fantasy XIII is a breath of fresh air in a day and age, and even back then, a day and age, where everyone needs to be open world, everything needs to be hub-based, and it's like, you know, what if we just kind of kept taking steps forward, and we had a couple areas that opened up, but we were working towards something here? to me, that's awesome. I love that stuff. It's refreshing because so many games are so focused on being broad and wide that they never focus on the nitty gritty, which I do think this game does. It's why its lore, I think, spins in circles because they had so much time to write. And I do think that the environments are confined because of how beautiful this game is. What you're looking at is a 2009 JRPG, okay? And I find that really hard to believe when looking at the footage. When I was playing it in my Series X, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe it. It's actually beautiful. And for me, that works. Like, I am not a graphics dude. We're on Retro Rebound. I love pixel art games. It's probably my favorite type of game, okay? But Final Fantasy XIII, consistently with its music, its atmosphere, and its environments, I was just stopping and going like, yo, this is, this is epic. I don't know. I feel like if you allow yourself to be absorbed by its really wild, creative environments that are inspired by the storytelling, they're not just these locations. I'm talking about like the lake that you land in towards the opening hours of the game, like the reason it's all frozen over. I don't know. I just find that so intriguing. It gets me invested more, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful video game, and its cinematics are just like, you know how a lot of MMOs have great cinematics and then you get into the game, you're like, this is nothing like that. It's kind of cool that a lot of the gameplay is cinematic in Final Fantasy XIII because it feels like there's consistency between the gameplay and its cutscenes, which is extremely rare. So for me, I found appreciation in that. Another point of criticism is the gameplay. This one, you know, how else do I put it? I disagree heavily that the paradigm shift system is bad. I respect the experimentation on Square Enix's front for the gameplay, right? Because you have active time battle, you've had turn-based, and this was active time battle again. However, what was really nice to see about this one is the way they did the paradigm shifts, I felt brought a level of unique interaction where some people call it the autopilot JRPG combat system. And if you auto battle through all of your fights, which you can't do, you could try, but you'll fail. But people think you can autopilot through this game, but you can't, because what happens is during certain phases of combat, enemies will shift as well. And so you have to shift your strategies. And a lot of the game planning for Final Fantasy XIII is in the pre-game. And it reminds me now, all these years later, I kind of think of something like The Witcher. And I know that may sound weird, but in The Witcher 3, this is a combat system that I think lives and dies on your preparation before you're making your potions, you're setting your runes properly, your gear's all good to go, and then you go out on a significant hunt. Something like Monster Hunter also, I think of a little bit, all the preparation, and then you see your game plan get perfectly executed when combat begins. I feel like Final Fantasy XIII is almost a weird active time battle version of that, where all of your setting up of everyone's roles, commando, ravager, medic, so on and so forth, and having them set in all these different paradigm shifts that you can adjust, that you can level up in the Crystarium, and setting up your own team builds, where I thought it was a battle system that really mentally invested me more than sometimes traditional turn-based, because traditional turn-based always comes down to weakness targeting. Okay, water, I'm going to use ice on you, or I'm going to use lightning on you. Boom. Okay, double damage. Yep, I know how to do this. But with Final Fantasy XIII, it tried something different. And I'm not saying, again, that the execution here was perfect on their end, but it was something to me that was refreshing. And once you hang with it and you get it, you're like, oh, okay, I see now. And I feel with the lack of abilities they give you in the beginning of the game, something people complain about, you start with like blitz and attack, you get ruin. You don't get a ton of attacks right off the bat. Some people are like, oh, it feels like there's nothing here, but it's because so many people are confused by the combat system that I feel like it's paced out pretty well as you build up your party. That does bring me to one complaint, which is kind of the limitation of control. So instead of like in previous Final Fantasy games where you can like control everyone, you're really just in the driver's seat of like a very particular character. I liked it on a story front. I can see how it hurt it for people on a gameplay front. But all in all, the music, the cinematics, the combat, the complex lore, I like it. I think it's a game that is worthy of a little respect for trying to do something different. I know it comes with a lot of sacrifices because it's beautiful, it's linear. Because its story is so sometimes tough to understand, a lot of great pieces of it can be overlooked. I'm not here to make excuses for them. It's a flawed video game, but I think that there's something undeniably charming about it. And I do think its characters shine in a lot of moments, again, that don't get credit because the voice acting is not that great. So it's very much Sonic 06 energy, right? It's kind of got that feel to it, but I don't think it's nearly that bad. Again, I'm not trying to sell it to you all like this is the perfect JRPG. I just think it's one that if you're open to it, you're a Final Fantasy vet, you really have just been sleeping on this one going, yeah, it's bad. Try it out. It can't hurt you. It's so cheap to pick up now. I think that if you understand, like a lot of things in gaming, and I know for some of us, you just can't accept it, and I respect that because I'm that way with other series. If you can, though, understand and accept its flaws because they're not really going to change, they're pretty rigid, and you just go forward knowing what to expect, I think you will actually end up being surprised in some instances here. So Final Fantasy XIII, in my eyes, better than y'all give it credit for. And we'll be back to talk about 13-2 at some point as well as Lightning returns, because you want to talk about, I'm putting light respect on this game because I'm critical of this one. Y'all haven't seen Final Fantasy 13-2 Maddie yet. Anyway, that's all I got to say about 13. Let me know what you think down below. And with that, I'll catch you all in the next Retro Rebound. Peace out.